Yeah, I hate to pour cold water on anything, but I think it's a fact of life that in geopolitical systems, legalities do not trump geopolitical realities.
Thanks for joining us on Esteem Television, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Augustine Ambe. I have a very interesting program for us today. Let me start this by saying that Africa is a continent that doesn't have a lot of friends, but it has a lot of resources, both natural and human resources. And these resources have not been like a benefit to Africa. They've really been more like a curse, because if you look at the exports of Africa, it's been the exports of human beings, it's been the export of natural resources or raw materials. And so Africa is in the process of really trying to catch up with the world because they've been left far back. And most of the people who have come to Africa have not really come to make Africa a better place. And some of the betterness that has happened incidentally. But more recently, I think Africa is beginning to really is being paid more attention. And so Africa these days is searching for partners, as individuals, as countries, as companies that will come and help Africa catch up with the rest of the world. And so we at Esteem, whenever we see somebody who knows Africa and who is showing interest in Africa, abnormal interest in Africa, we'll add, then we like to chat with them and see what's different, what makes them different, or just get their point of view. And one of those people today is Ambassador Tibor Nagy, former Ambassador Tibor Nagy. I'm going to just go through, because I looked at his background, and I just wanted to give you a complete background. Ambassador Tibor Nagy is the former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs from 2018 to 2021. He's a career service officer who spent 32 years in the service of the American government. Of the 32 years, more than 20 of them were spent in Africa, serving as, and I'm going to give this chronologically, he was the ambassador to Guinea from 1996 to 1999, the American ambassador to Ethiopia from 1999 to 2002. Actually, when I said I'm going to start chronologically, that is more the ambassadorship, because he actually started in Togo in 1987 to 1990 as a deputy chief of mission, in Cameroon 1990 to 1993, and in Nigeria as in 1993 to 1995. All of these as deputy chief of mission. I also see that he spent some time in Zambia and the Seychelles. And let me bring Ambassador Tibor Nagy so that we continue, and he helps us in understanding his African experiences. Thanks for joining us, Ambassador.
Thanks so much, Augustine, for having me.
Yes, it seems to me that you have been America's man in Africa for quite a while in different capacities. What I really want you to share with us to start this program is, what did you learn of Africa and about Africans that the average American who hasn't been down to Africa would want to know?
Yeah, the biggest thing is that if you mention the word Africa, and you know this from being here, if you mention the word Africa to an average American, their image is the land of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. You know, disease, hunger, war, famine, those types of things. And yet, if you spend any time in Africa, you realize that that is such a false picture, because especially looking in the future, you know, I like to say that as soon as I landed on the continent, I became an Afro-optimist, and I have been doing my best to set the record straight. As you mentioned, you know, you were talking about Africa's wealth, and I have to say, yes, the natural resources are phenomenal, but the real wealth is the people. You know, it is just incredible what Africans have in their culture, their history, their outlook on life could serve as phenomenal examples for the rest of the world. So, you know, I did not know anything about Africa when I arrived in Zambia, but my dear wife and I very quickly realized that that is the place to be, and it's a perfect place to raise our children.
Wow. So let me ask you this though: before you went to Africa, especially coming from Europe as an immigrant, well, you came too young. Maybe you don't have that. I was thinking that maybe you have a broader idea of the world than an average American who has never left the country.
Yeah, you know, growing up as a little kid in Hungary and then having to be a political refugee, I always say that I'm the only U.S. ambassador who has ever spent time in a refugee camp as a refugee and not as a visitor, coming with the, you know, big car and the flag, then ending up in the United States. Yeah, my outlook on the world was different. You know, I like to tell people that my birth is Hungarian, my citizenship is American, but with all the times I spent in Africa, I think of my heart as very much African.
Well, you know, I'm glad you mentioned that because for a while I started thinking about you. I want you to know that Africans, and I'm going to use the word Ambazonians, are paying a lot of attention to you and listening to what you're saying. And at some point, you know how they used to call Bill Clinton the black president? Sometimes I just look at you that you are the African American ambassador. I don't know how you take that, but that's something which I wanted to be a compliment, because one of the reasons is because you not only, it's not just the interest that you show, but also how clearly you're speaking about it. I remember watching an interview, I think this was on France 24. And I remember how I have never heard anybody in authority or in any international organization speak so clearly about the situation in Ambazonia like you did.
We all know the history. We all know where this is coming from. And the Anglophone population of Cameroon would very much like to be considered as first-class citizens. And there is a sense that they feel like, and they have felt a long time, like they're second-class citizens. It is up to dialogue and true dialogue to move this process forward.
So that's when I first took note of you.
Yeah, and that's, you know, at that point I was, of course, still representing the United States government. And when you're a representative of the government, a lot of the words coming out of your mouth are, of course, the government's words. And, you know, there's no such thing when you're a high-level government official to say, well, this is what the United States believes, but personally, I believe something different. That's just not possible. So once you leave government service, then of course you have a lot more flexibility to, you know, to say the things that you believe. But during that interview, absolutely, you know, as I think I mentioned to you before, I came into back as assistant secretary with Cameroon very much on my heart, and leaving as assistant secretary, Cameroon is one of my, I think, top 3 disappointments. That my service time, we could not advance the, you know, we just could not make any positive advancements there.
Like I said, you spoke very clearly about what the problem is with Ambazonians. Is that what, and you were speaking in the capacity of the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. So is that the understanding of the American government, that that really Ambazonia has a problem, and that problem is one that is articulated the way you did.
Yeah, I was speaking the American position because the United States, of course, was very concerned with what was going on in Cameroon. But also, the U.S. position has tended to be that the United States of America supports a unified Cameroon for a whole number of reasons, and that's what I was articulating, that the fundamental problem started with the Cameroon government. The fundamental problem remains with the Cameroon government, and the solution, if there's going to be one, I believe the Cameroon government definitely has to play a major role in the solution.
I really wasn't going to go into the situation in the southern Cameroons or in the Anglophone. I'll use all the names because whatever name they call us, or they call the Ambazonian people, what the name they've chosen to call them, it doesn't change anything. I think the problems remain the same. And in this case, we'll say what is in the name, but they do see what is in the name. And I'm sure you understand that.
Yeah, Augustine, I get a lot of grief on Twitter because I don't refer to the Southern Cameroons as Ambazonia. I refer to it sometimes as Southern Cameroons. Most of the time I refer to it as Anglophone Cameroon. The whole question of nomenclature, I agree with you. We all know what we're talking about. And, my problem has been that the population is still divided. There is not a unified position amongst the population. So I'm trying to be as inclusive as possible and use the nomenclature that I think everybody could go with.
You said something which I hear a lot of it, and I to be honest with you, I don't agree with it, because the people who we are, the people or the group, let me use the word the group that has caused the problem which everyone is trying to address now is not everybody. So I think we should focus on the group, and to be honest, that group has shown that they are the majority, because I think on September 22nd, 2017, everybody saw that all the villages, everybody stood up they stood up to protest what has been happening to them. So sometimes when people try to say, oh, Ambazonians are not united, no, I think Ayok Tabe, who was the first leader, who is now in jail, did demonstrate that we were all united, and he was being effective because everybody was with him, and that's why I think he is in jail now, and he's in jail in terrible circumstances.
I agree with you totally that the people are 100% united in what they are upset about. When I was talking about a certain amount of disunity, is I don't believe in, you tell me I'm wrong, I don't believe the people are 100% united on what the solutions are going to be. Unfortunately, there is no polling, in Southern Cameroons as to, choose A if you want an Ambazonian republic, choose B if you want a true decentralized federalism, choose C if you want to return to the binational structure. So until there is that type of a unanimity, I agree with you 100% on what the people are against, but it's not as clear that there's 100% on what the people are for. Or am I wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong. But let me say that, and I really. One of the things I really want to accomplish in this interview is reconcile what the friends of Ambazonia or the friends of Southern Cameroons and what the international community think. I want to reconcile that with what Ambazonians also think. And I also want to reconcile what the problem is from what the international community with what Ambazonians know the problem is. Because to Ambazonians, it's not really a question of majority. It's a question of legality. It's a question of legality, and that's why you see a lot of lawyers being exiled, being shot, being killed being maltreated. It is because it is a legal issue. And so once that is understood, then I think we will all start talking about real solutions. Because right now it looks like we're speaking bypass each other. Because and I'm saying this, Mr. Ambassador, because everybody internationally say, let's go to the root cause. And yes, the root cause is not about the root cause of Southern Cameroon. Everybody has always wanted to make it a resolution of majority. It's not really a matter of majority because the Southern Cameroon was a trust territory of the UN, and 76B of that trust territory makes it very clear that this country should be led to this territory should be led to self-government or independence. In fact, it was the American president, I think it was Woodrow Wilson, who at the League of Nations did not want German colonies to be taken over by the victors who defeated Germany in the First World War, and that's how come the mandate system was created. Then that became the trusteeship system when the UN was created. Are you seeing where I'm coming, sir?
Yeah, I absolutely see where you're coming. You talk about root causes. Let's add one other factor. As I mentioned that from my limited knowledge, I believe that the Southern Cameroonians, or dare I say the potential Ambazonians, are not united in solutions. But from my knowledge, the Cameroonian government itself is not united. They very much have divisions within themselves, within the government, as to some people are much more open to accommodation, and some people are very, very hard line, who want to respond with an iron fist. And then, you mentioned the basic fundamental problem. For me, that's relatively simple. To me, the basic fundamental problem is that Anglophone Cameroonians have been treated as second-class citizens in every single respect of the word. And, you can try to paint over that any number of ways, with legal systems, with constitutional systems, with national assemblies, with elections. But as long as that mindset stays within the Cameroonian government, there is not going to be a resolution.
All right. So I understand that part. I think if I if I were to accomplish something today, and if we were going to make a statement about what I just explained about what 76B, that's why you see anytime you hear Ambazonians speak about their issue, they're going back to the UN. And it is because they were never programmed to become part of La République du Cameroon. In fact, I sometimes think that it was more a matter of a Cold War situation where Ambazonia became, or the Southern Cameroons became part of La République du Cameroon. But then if you look at all the territories that their politics became complicated because of Cold War situations, they're all free today. I was reading a piece somewhere where somebody wrote, if Brexit is possible, then Ambazit is also possible. So it seems to me that the law does not apply in Africa. And I would like you to address that, because if we follow the law, then we really should go back and correct. That's the way Ambazonians see it. That if we were going to follow the law, we should go back and correct what happened. Because I was reading a piece where the American ambassador in Lagos at the time said the plebiscite vote that the people of Ambazonia were voting to get out of Nigeria, not to join La République du Cameroon. I think his name was Ambassador Williamson or something like that. I don't know if you're familiar with all that information, because Ambazonians are very, very detailed in their understanding of what their problem is, because there's no way in the world, even the British and the French, for I would say thousands of years, never could see eye to eye. I don't know why anybody believes that taking an quote unquote Anglo-Saxon population or Africans that were brought up in that tradition suddenly have them join a tradition that I would say is a very heavy-handed tradition.
Yeah, I hate to pour cold water on anything, but I think it's a fact of life that in geopolitical systems, legalities do not trump geopolitical realities. And I'm also kind of like you, coming from a background where after World War I, my native country of Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory, despite the wonderful feelings that Mr. Wilson had for self-determination, because the winners called the shots. The British and the French decided that Austria-Hungary was too much of a threat, so they dismembered it. And what I hear you saying, I also hear very, very intensely motivated people from the other side of Africa, a little place called Somaliland, who are just as passionate because they have a very strong legal case for nationhood, but that has been overlooked, as I say, by, unfortunately, geopolitical realities, because as you well know, the African Union is scared to death of further state secessions, like what happened with Eritrea, what happened with South Sudan, because there are examples all over the African continent of potential regions that would want to split off, from their home countries. I mean, look right across the border from southern Cameroon, and you have the case of Biafra. And we have a very heated legal case going on in Nigeria with somebody who wants to take Biafra out of the Nigerian Federation. So, I learned the hard way, and my Hungarian community is still incensed about what happened in 1919 and 1920. That legal arguments in the international fora don't always carry the weight of political realities.
Well, let me say this, okay, and I really appreciate you saying that, because I think my Ambazonian people, or the people of the Southern Cameroon, should hear that, and maybe rethink, because that is something. It's so heavily, it heavily influences the thinking of Ambazonians, and therefore the solutions that they're looking for. I really want our people to understand what Ambassador Tibor Nagy is saying, and then let our lawyers also make clarity so that Ambazonian people know where they're going. But Mr. Ambassador, if you look at the way the people of Ambazonia have been treated from 1961 until today, I think in 1919, Paul Biya actually admitted in a conference in Paris that they have been on a mission of annexing the people, of assimilating, that's the word he used, of assimilating the people of Southern Cameroon. And through that assimilation, you cannot assimilate the people without destroying their culture, their economy, their institutions. And that's what has been going on. And I'm asking myself, anybody looking at this really should be helping the Ambazonian people to free themselves from that bondage, because that is unacceptable.
I agree with you. It is unacceptable. And I often use, for the Cameroonian example, I always put that in the mirror with the Canadian example, because it's the absolute reverse. If I'm correct, Cameroon is about 80% francophone, 20% anglophone. Canada is 80% anglophone, 20% francophone. For a long time there, you actually had a violent resistance in the province of Quebec, because they themselves felt like they were being treated as second-class citizens, and they wanted to get out of Canada. As a matter of fact, when President de Gaulle visited Canada once, and he visited Quebec, and he actually publicly said, "Vive Quebec libre," much to the chagrin of England and, of course, British Canadians. But since those days, the Canadians have gone out of the way to embrace the Francophone Canadians, bring them into the system, to the fact that it would be inconceivable for any senior Canadian government official to not be totally bilingual. As a matter of fact, if a Canadian makes an official speech, they go to the trouble of having one page in French, the next page in English, the next page in French, the next page in English. And then I contrast that with your situation in Cameroon, where you have a head of state who has been the head of state for now 39 years, who does not speak one of the two official languages of the country. I'm sorry, but President Paul Biya does not speak English. And that, to me, sends a stronger message than anything else as to the value of the Anglophone Cameroonians within that system.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, I read that, and when I read that, I was thinking, okay, the Anglo-Saxon world is a more progressive world than the Francophone world, and I'm not the only one saying it. If I think Charles de Gaulle did actually admit that the form of government where in the Anglo-Saxon world, he mentioned the British and the Americans, where they can actually debate an issue and come to a resolution, that the French don't have that. In fact, he said, and that was an argument he was making in order to establish a strong presidency, because he says that whenever the French are put together to debate an issue, they're on each other's neck. They start cutting each other's neck. That's what he said. And so he definitely did not believe that that the French can debate issues like the British and the Americans do. So if La République du Cameroon was it came from an Anglophone or from an Anglo-Saxon tradition, yeah, such a thing will be possible. So when I read you write that, I'm like, does Ambassador Tibor Nagy understand who the French are and what cultures they've pushed in their French colonies, and they are still there now. You know what is going on in Mali. You knew what happened in Ivory Coast. In Ivory Coast, they were saying, oh, Gbagbo was clinging to power. Meanwhile, Paul Biya at the time was over 30 years in power. And so it seems to me that in Africa, nobody really cares. And I think Mitterrand, actually, I made a quote where Mitterrand actually said, in places like Africa, genocide doesn't matter. So those of us who want to understand and create solutions that come from human beings, because human beings are thinking animals, we find it very frustrating that it's like the people of Africa are not considered, and everything is playing games, manipulating them, and if they kill each other, that's wonderful. It reduces it. I've even read some specialists who say Africa cannot be allowed to develop, because if Africa developed, the standard of living in the West would drop. So Africa must remain a raw material supplier. And I read at this and like, this is not acceptable. I know I'm packing too much. I know I'm packing too much into this statement.
No. You're absolutely right. I mean, given the historical context, Africa has every right to tell the Western world to go to hell. I'm sorry to have to put it that directly, but if you look at the history, initially it was colonialism, then decolonization, but the great powers, quote unquote, in the West and even the Soviet Union looked at Africa in terms of their colonial history and in the great power rivalry between East and West. Then we had a very brief respite in the 1990s, starting after the multi-party elections in Benin and Malawi, where things were looking good. Then we had the horrible events of September 11th, and then again, Africa was looked at in the scope of is Africa contributing, helping with the global war against terrorism, or is it not? Then we move on now to, Africa we all know, is going to be the Saudi Arabia of the 21st century, because Africa has exactly the key resources that the world needs for, new technologies and green technologies and things like that. So God forbid that we get back to a period where, the EU, China, or the United States looks at Africa purely as a source of raw materials. Thank God that Africa has what I call the youth tsunami. It's the only region in the world that has a youth tsunami. And whereas the old leaders, I'm not going to name them, but we all know who they are, they were perfectly comfortable with dictatorship, autocracy, making their relatives rich, making their village rich. But the young people coming up aren't going to put up with that. So, when a leader is 80 some years old, we know they're not going to be around forever. And the young 20 and 30-year-olds coming up, they're going to step in. And my prayer is that it's going to be a totally different continent, one that's going to step up for itself, speak up for itself, and not put up with being used and manipulated.
Actually, I had a little topic where you and I are going to talk about your contributions in the youth and some of the things you've done, because I spent some time reading on them, and you've done wonderful work. I think that's why I'm talking to you. And I want to ask you this question. Africa cannot free itself without friends. And these African youth cannot accomplish some of what you're talking about unless they have friends. And most Africans, I would say, are looking towards the United States for that kind of friendship, because left on their own, Africans, I don't believe they can free themselves like the Vietnamese freed themselves, or some of the other countries. And when I look at a lot of the places that have freed themselves, they've had help from stronger partners. And in Africa, they don't have those stronger partners. And let me ask you this: how can this is a difficult question, because sometimes by the time I ask the question, I already know the answer. But what do Africans? I'm going to ask this straight. Why can't America say, hey, the African people, if America wants to control Africa, then they need to put the interests of Africans ahead and support them in fighting coloniality. I want to go in fighting colonization. And now that I just mentioned this, I want to say that it is FDR that championed the end of colonization in the world. And so America has been a champion of freedom. And why can't America say, okay, the Ambazonian people are fighting a just fight, and if we support or help the Ambazonian people, then it spreads freedom. Because in the final, even if it's, look, I am an econ major, so if you look at it even in terms of benefits, I think America makes a lot of its wealth by doing business with countries that have already developed and can buy American products. So Africa is a huge market, but we cannot that huge market will never be realized by suppressing the people and supporting the governments that themselves, a huge number of them, are sponsored from Paris. I'm going to say this without fear or favor, because I think that is clear. So why can't America make a decision that, look, let's go, and I know you do, and that's why I'm saying we're going to come and talk about some of the things that you have accomplished in the time you worked in Africa. It was impressive, and most of them are going to empower the people. But America, as the leader of human rights in the world, needs to continue to do that, and I think this country will fare better than playing geopolitics and playing power. I mean, I'm saying as a layperson, so I'm not a strategist, but I would like to hear what you say.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, when you say Africa free themselves, who are we talking about freeing Africa from? Are we talking about, because, the case of Southern Cameroon is very specific. But if we say African people in general, are we talking about freeing them from their own governments?
Well, I want to answer that. I'm so glad you answered that. Because Africans, this is the thinking of Africans. Africans see, when I'm going to tell you a little story. I needed 4 more credits to graduate, and I looked at all the credits being offered. There was only one class that had 4 credits, and that class was African history. And you would be surprised that growing up in Africa, you don't even know the history. So I took that class because of the credits, and I learned so much. I learned that the whole of West Africa is dominated by the French, because during the colonial times, the French were definitely an inferior power to the British, because the best place to live in Africa was East Africa. And so for the first time, I looked at the map of Africa, and it was so different to me. It's the map that has always been there. And then I started reading it, and I saw that from Cape to Cairo. You know, the British had that thing, Cape to Cairo. The East Africa is dominated by by the British, and West Africa is dominated by the French. And if you look at all the coups, all the poverty, most of them are centered in sub-Saharan Africa. And we know that Paris has never given independence to these people because they signed these cooperation agreements which make them pick and choose. And that's why Paul Biya can be in power for 40 years. The people of La République du Cameroon, whether they cannot do anything. In Ivory Coast, it's the same thing. Gbagbo came and tried. We all know what happened to him. Look at what is happening in Mali. The French are the people everybody's pointing to. So sometimes when the international discussion is going on and they don't discuss that part of it, we don't believe it. We don't believe there's honesty going on. We just believe it's game playing. I don't know if somebody has ever told you that, Mr. Ambassador, but Africans don't see all the resolutions passed at the UN as addressing an issue. We see them as trying to maintain a status quo that is unfair, and until that status quo, in fact, that is illegal if you look at international law. So help our audience understand some of this.
You know, it's really interesting because when it comes to political power, African states tend to be fairly weak. But when it comes to a place like the United Nations, Africa as a bloc has more votes than anybody else. And the African bloc tends to vote by consensus and vote together. So I know that governments like the United States of America, governments like China, are very seriously, looking at African power in the United Nations. Now, what your discussion basically gets down to is that Africa does not get the right amount of international attention. That some of the larger countries or the ex-colonial powers, when they deal with Africa, they definitely deal from a senior brother, junior brother point of view. The way to get around that is going to be, no one's going to do it for Africa. Africa is going to have to do it for itself. And I'm being very realistic. I'm not being diplomatic here at all. That's why I point to some of what I consider real anomalies. That Africa has this youthful, enthusiastic, exuberant population. You and I know that I have never met an African anywhere on the continent whose goal was to not make sure that their children were educated to the maximum extent. They would give up anything to make sure their children are educated. So you have an attitude that is very, very pro-educational. You also have mineral resources, which are incredibly rich beyond belief. I mean, to me, one country like the Democratic Republic of the Congo has more of the resources needed for the 21st century than I'd say all the rest of the world combined. And yet, because, and I'll put it right down to it, poor leadership, the countries have not been able to or willing to stand up for themselves. African people are going to have to force their governments to represent them instead of their pocketbooks. Very simply, can you imagine what the per capita income in the Democratic Republic of Congo would be if since 1960 they had the kind of responsible government that cared for its own people as some of the other well-governed countries in the world have? I mean, to me, it's inconceivable. It used to make me sick when I would see the potential as opposed to the reality. All because somebody is a very poor leader and only cares about making themselves rich or keeping themselves in power or making sure that their sons and daughters are ministers, instead of, accepting the fundamental fact that the people are the owners of the country and they have to represent the people's interests. So to me, there's that anomaly. And again, I'll be honest with you, no other country in the world is going to quote unquote fix, this arrangement.
No, I do understand. When you grow up in Africa, they teach you a lot of European history. And if I remember my European history, I used to. You see, if you look at the way European countries free themselves from their own messy situations, you found a lot of citizens going across the border to fight. If you see how the whole of Western world got developed, is because technology was easily transferred. There were no barriers, and so when you talk about poor leadership, I'm going to say this, and then I'll get a reaction from you. When we look at poor leadership, if you go to a lot of the countries, we think that these people remain in power because they're supported by the West, especially the Francophone countries. If you look at the AU, we don't think the AU represents Africa. We think that the AU is heavily financed by EU. So he who pays how does it say? He who pays the piper determines the tune. So we don't think these institutions represent Africa at all. And so when you talked about Africans vote in groups, I'm thinking francophone countries. Yes, France tells them where to vote, and if you don't vote, you will not be in power for a very long time.
Not only France, China definitely tells them how to vote, and the United States does its best to persuade people to vote in our direction too. I mean, anyone who tells me that their country's foreign policy does not give primacy to their own interests, I will say is lying.
So when you talk about these youth, I really do think. So when you talk of these youth, yeah, maybe if, to be honest with you, when one mistakenly gets into power, there was a time when Laurent Gbagbo was a youth. And guess what? He got into power. Guess what happened to him? We know that. So sometimes we find ourselves just doomed. It's like, power is what controls the world. And Africa has the least of it. And so when Friends of Africa say, help yourself, let me even stop there. You see, that is why you see a lot of countries start looking for other help that doesn't come from the West. But these are people who were grown, trained by the West. I mean, when Nkrumah leaves Ghana and starts going to Romania to go and look for help to come and help himself, I'm like, how does this help the United States that educated him? You know what I'm saying? So I think the West, I don't know. Maybe the world is just a world where North Korea, because they have all these weapons, yeah, they can do what they want. But any other country that's following the law and obeying, I'll use the word obey. Yeah, then you sit back and say, okay, so North Korea can have its way because they have these missiles. They're firing them left and right. I, as somebody who know that it's not going to help them because the other people that have bigger missiles than you. So it's a very confused world, and maybe we need some leadership. Mr. Ambassador, I don't believe that America should sit back and say, because America has been the leader of freedoms in the world. And I promote this a lot because when I read the history, I see every change that took place, America led it. And I would like America to do the same thing. And if we're going to fight, I like you because you're pointing Quebec to the French and to La République, to Cameroon. But I also like to see you or some other person, not you, some other person, some other power come with an Anglo-Saxon and say, these are also our people, our values, and it's unacceptable that they are going through this. I mean, they've burned all the villages in our territory. They've murdered. They've committed crimes which, if it was happening to a non-African population, it would be totally unacceptable. But then it's being blocked So it's not being known. All the information that we know around the world is what youth with their Android phones are sharing. Otherwise, when it started, they cut off the internet. I know the world condemned that. And right now, I think it's just blocking it. I'm more venting frustrations here more than anything you can say, Mr. Ambassador.
I'm totally with you because, you know, there is some tragedy on the continent, and yes, it gets a news story, but it's very quickly forgotten. Whereas if a tennis player goes to Australia, you know, and hasn't had their COVID shot, then that stays as the leading story in the news, you know, day after day after day. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, a couple of thoughts. What frustrates me is that Africa is sitting on so much power, but it is not using its power the way it could be. You see what I'm saying? Now, yes, we in the United States have huge geopolitical problems with China because China intends to remake the world order in its own image. But from the African point of view, I think it's a very positive, positive deal that they now have counterweights to the West on, you know, some of these business deals. Now, of course, you know, the Chinese are also in it for themselves. They're not in it, no matter what they say, they're not in it to, you know, to help the Africans at their own expense. But the Africans certainly have other options now, especially when it comes to dealing with these phenomenal treasures that they have. But at the end of the day, whether it's an American company that develops the mineral wealth or if it's a Chinese company, the important thing is that the benefits go to the African state and the people in that state, not to the president. And it's always a he, most except in Tanzania, it's always a he and his family. You know, that's why I am a huge proponent of young Africans getting as much education as possible. And I'm a huge proponent of encouraging university partnerships between the United States, American universities, and African universities, because you know from being here that we have what's called a student-centered, university system, and we encourage our university students to make trouble and, you know, come up with disagreeing points of view, and that I think could serve the continent so well in helping educate and prepare the next generation for insisting on stepping forward, for not putting up with with gangsters and criminals who call themselves presidents.
No, absolutely. I saw most of that program. You also wanted, even where I think you call YALI, Young African Leaders Initiative.
Young African Leaders Initiative. That was President Obama's, and now I think we have like 400,000, maybe even more now, young Africans in the YALI network.
Yes, and I see where you're actually encouraging exchanges in universities, sharing research, sharing. Even I think you also wanted them to even partner in offering degrees. So you are doing an incredible job in that field. And I
just need money.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I started doing some reading on some of what you've done, and I was very impressed. And that is empowering. Now I cannot let you go, Ambassador, without having you share your experiences. Because when I look at when you were in Cameroon, you were there from 1990 to 1993, and those were the tumultuous years of wind of change, and there were so many of the conflict coming head to head around that period. There was the Anglophone problem coming in through SDF. There was obviously the wind of change going on in the world. And you were there, so share your experiences with us, please.
Yes, as you say, I was in Cameroon for its very first multi-party election, and as I have said before, I still encourage people to go back and read that National Democratic Institute report on that first election, because it was extremely controversial. Cameroonian people were enthusiastic beyond belief. And then their response of course, because so many were unhappy with the election results, their response was I think it was about at least a 6-month period of the Ville Morte, when there was an incredible amount of social turbulence. But through it all, and I traveled all over Cameroon. The only place I really did not go into was the eastern part, which is bordering Central African Republic. I saw the tremendous potential of Cameroon. Easily a high middle income country, and then the oil, the pipeline from Chad, the huge agricultural wealth, and then, as I said earlier, on the people were just incredible. At one point, USAID was trying to help develop a U.S. style university. As you know, I'm very interested in universities, and we had a project at the University of Chang, and I left there hoping for a real evolution in politics, economics, liberalization, and lo and behold, I come back as assistant secretary, and not only has not much changed, but the situation had actually declined with the violence in the Anglophone area. Even back when I was in Cameroon at the embassy, I would tell some of the government officials, because traveling in the Anglophone zone, you very quickly realize how neglected it was. And the famous Ring Road.
Yes.
And I even said back then, I said one sign. I said two signs. One sign you could make would be to pave, or as you say in West Africa, tar the Ring Road. Because I quickly realized that probably the people in power in Yaoundé didn't want to tie the Anglophone region all together. And the other thing I suggested even back then was the head of state should go and make a speech in Bamenda in English, because it's something for the people to hear, their head of state speaking their language. But as I said, I come back to the office in 2018, and the situation is so bad. It made me heartsick. And as I said earlier, Cameroon was one of my 3 biggest disappointments, is that the U.S. government, while I was there, could not make any headway for a lot of reasons, but we just could not make any headway.
There was a story you were telling on another show, and I'm interested in hearing that story. You talked about a visit to Bamenda with when you went there to yeah, I'd like to hear that story. Was getting really interested, but it was really short. I want you to tell that story, please. I'd like to hear.
Well, I went to Bamenda a number of times, and to Limbe and to Buea. I actually climbed Mount Cameroon. But there had been a demonstration. John Farunbi was under house arrest, and the people in Bamenda were coming out and demonstrating, and some people were shot. So Ambassador Frances Cook, who was very well and famously known in Cameroon, I was her deputy, and she asked me to go to Bamenda personally to look into it. So I went to Bamenda, talked to the doctors. I saw the x-rays of the bullet wounds and things like that. And then I met with the security chief of Bamenda. If I remember, his name was Colonel Pum. And, we were talking, and immediately I realized that here's the man who's responsible for the security of Northwest Province, but he doesn't speak a word of English. And I found that with official after official, here are people who are responsible for the day-to-day lives of Anglophone Cameroonians, but they do not speak English. In my mind, coming from the type of system we have in the United States, that was absolutely, absolutely inconceivable. I went back and I wrote the report, sent it into Washington about what really happened. And of course, what really happened was totally different than the official version, that was put out by the government.
Well, I just wanted to add what else you did not experience, but that we do. In the hospitals, the doctors and the nurses, they speak to you in French. In the schools, Well, I have a recording of a university professor teaching the kids. Like I already said, I'm an econ major, and I was listening to this professor trying to explain international trade, and it's just destroying those kids. It was not teaching them.
The policy must have the signature of Ensuite. A marine policy must be signed by or on behalf on the Ensuite, provides that in the case of a corporation, the corporate seal may be sufficient, but nothing in this section shall be constricted as requiring the subscription of the corporation to be on the seal. The only signature required here is a signature of Ensuite. An assurate cannot sign the policy without a problem.
And that is what the Ambazonian people are fighting. Before we started having Androids where we can just call directly, you had before then, when you made a call, you had to go through a central system that then distributes the calls. In Bamenda, after the 90s, I think after the 90s, they answered you in French. That is what we're going through. And so when I don't want to go back to this because I wanted to really move this conversation, but what the people of Ambazonia are living under, it's when you talked about the ring road, I think what they would like to do, and I think that's what they wanted to accomplish with this, they want to clear the territory of Ambazonians. Otherwise, why would you go and burn villages? These villagers were not even part of the conversation. They cleared all the villages, burned their food, went to the farms, destroyed some of them, destroyed their livestock. When people start doing that, so when you were talking about ring road, I'm like, no, they have no idea. They don't want it. They want Ambazonians to like Paul Biya said, they are out to assimilate them. And that's why they close our ports. They bankrupt that territory. All the institutions we had, they took them away. When they first came, they took all the road maintenance vehicles, they took them all to their side. They downgraded our technical schools, some that were sponsored by the Americans. I have the former prime minister who said he came to the United States and he was given some money to upgrade that school. So when you hear the Ambazonian people, and they really picked their guns by accident, and it seems to me that that's really the best thing that happened to them. So when you were saying that, I was just thinking that no, La République du Cameroon and the French design is not to make that place livable. But I think they would have had their way if they made it livable. But they did not, and I think something else has started. And I'm going to say this, which maybe an ambassador would not find it easy to answer. And so when I hear the American government say we are for one Cameroon, it seems to me that they're supporting, they're taking sides. They're taking sides.
No. Let me clarify that. While again, I can no longer speak for the United States government. You know that. I'm now a private citizen. But the thinking at the time was the support of the territorial integrity of Cameroon, but absolutely push for the rights of Anglophone Cameroonians to be, at the same level equality as the Francophone citizens, because there was quite a bit of political pressure within the United States government for that. Again, though, I have to tell you, I was a member of a diaspora. I guess I still am, the Hungarian diaspora. And during times of communism, we were very, very vocal in pushing the United States government towards certain policies. It really helps when a diaspora is united in what they want. because then the American political system listens to them. If you have different groups representing different interests, different policies showing up at the door of a member of Congress, different weeks, then they simply give up. They have a nice, courteous meeting, but they simply give up. We see that now with the Ethiopian conflict. There's two very, very strong different points of view, and both communities are being hyperactive in petitioning Congress. But if it's a single community, for example, Somaliland and Somalia, there's quite a bit of difference there, but the Somalilanders are very, very united in their desire for recognition and an independent state. So that's my word of advice: is a diaspora really needs to be united and needs to know where to put the pressure.
Yes, I know. I totally agree with you. There's some work to be done. The diaspora was very united until Ayok Tabe got picked up, and then what happened. And I think that was designed to happen that way. But yes, the Ambazonians need to overcome that. And this is the one about Kemende. When you talk of the youth taking responsibility and doing the right thing, this is somebody who was doing the right thing. We know what happened. There's no doubt. We all know what happened. You just need to look at the man and know what happened and the timing of it. And one of the things that we really appreciate, people like you who speak truth to power or who speak honestly, is that you do even with nuances, we still get it. Tell me what you felt when you heard this story, sir.
I was absolutely disgusted because I read a little bit about his background, and again, he was the right person at the right time, and he was being very noble and very courageous. And when I saw that he had been assassinated, I immediately thought to myself, oh my gosh, the government's going to claim that it was the Ambo boys who did it. The Ambazonians are going to say that it was definitely the government. People will come up with specific names. I have heard from some of my close colleagues, that, oh, it was definitely gendarmes, and here's the name of the gendarmes, who did it. But then I also heard from others, that, oh no, it was an offshoot of one of the Ambazonian groups, and that's the tragedy, is because, from the day I walked into my job, and I would meet with Cameroonian government officials, and I would, tell them about the horrible pictures that I saw, about the terrible things that their people were doing, and then they would bring me a big book that had pictures of gendarmes who had had their arms cut off, or teachers who had been decapitated, and schools that had been burned. And, it pains me greatly that in so many African conflicts, it's always the innocents who suffer, the good people. One of my heroes, when Gandhi said that if you pursue an eye for an eye, soon the whole world is blind. And what's happening is, does it matter to the poor teacher that had his head cut off who did it? What matters is that the poor person who was educating other people is dead, or the woman who in the village who was brutally raped. All the attention seems to then go on, well, who did it, instead of the poor woman was raped, brutally raped. And I see this over and over again in so many conflicts that it is extremely, extremely frustrating. And yet, I'm a student of history and politics, and I know that in these kind of civil wars, it always tends to be that the most violent group ends up taking over the movement. We saw that in the Russian Revolution. The February Revolution was more or less civilized, but then the October Revolution was the Bolsheviks. You know, we've seen that in Viet. We've seen that in all of these struggles. That's why my heart absolutely hurts and bleeds for the good people of Cameroon. It is just a tragedy beyond belief.
Educate Ambazonians about the relationship that you understand that France has with the Republic of Cameroon, because Ambazonians think they are fighting France.
Yeah, I can't, obviously I can't speak for the French Republic, but I do know from my personal experiences that France itself has had a lot of frustrations with the Cameroonian government, but at the same time, I'm not speaking for France, they see themselves as having a significant interest, obviously, in Cameroon. So I suspect that makes them believe that their actions are somewhat limited because of that. And then again, I want to remind people that when the rest of the world looks at Cameroon, there are two conflicts going on. There are two crises. Of course, there's the crisis in the Anglophone region, but there's also the extremism threat in the north from Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa. So that is also very much seen as a threat to the overall region.
Okay, if I may ask you just one question about that. Why is it that the international community think that when there's Boko Haram, they can come in and intervene and give arms to La République du Cameroun to fight it? One of the things that I like about the United States, even though it's becoming a negative, but the fact that the citizens are armed so that they can fight back, I think that was really the reason why citizens have a right to own arms. But in a country like Cameroon, why is it that the international community can come in one conflict and not come in another, especially when the citizens right and cannot help the citizens or help resolve it or punish the government that is doing evil? It seems to me that this government is a club that is really separated from the people, and so they can take all the punishment, and the other government will just say, well, it's your people, and the people don't like that.
Oh, I'm sure the people don't like that, and they get frustrated by that. But again, foreign policy is looking after the interests of your country. If the United States of America believes that there's a threat from Boko Haram or ISIS West Africa that could endanger the U.S. homeland, then they are going to cooperate with forces in the area that are fighting against those terrorist organizations. However, because we all know that human rights policy is a major component of U.S. foreign policy, for example, the training we were given to the Cameroonian military units, primarily certain groups of the BIR, Brigade Intervention Rapide, the rules were that the people we trained, yes, great, go fight the extremists. But if they were going to be somehow used in the Anglophone crisis, then we would stop the cooperation immediately.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador, I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I think you've educated a lot of our audience, and the people who watch us are mostly those who think the way I do, and there's a lot of them are opinion leaders. So you answered a lot of questions today, and I really appreciate that. And to be honest with you, I think that it would change minds, especially some of the things that you said about the legal approach to fighting this thing, that it doesn't work.